Ohio, 1989. A 5-year-old boy vanishes while walking to his school bus stop. For 36 years his family searches, police find nothing, the case goes cold. Then in 2025, a DNA breakthrough reveals the heartbreaking truth. Jacob Turner's remains are found. His family finally gets answers and a decades-old mystery is solved. How did advanced forensic technology uncover what happened to a little boy who disappeared on an ordinary morning in small-town Ohio? Stay with us as we uncover this tragic but resolved cold case. Hello and welcome to the DNA Archives, where we dive deep into cold cases, missing persons, and the mysteries that DNA finally solves. If you're drawn to stories of truth, justice, and the families who never stop searching, you're in the right place. Please hit the like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe so you never miss a case. Now let's go back to where this heartbreaking story began. October 3rd, 1989, Millfield, Ohio, a small town tucked into the rolling hills of Appalachia. Population barely 800, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where kids rode bikes without helmets and doors stayed unlocked at night. It was a Tuesday morning, cool and crisp, the leaves just beginning to turn orange and gold. The Turner family lived in a modest 2-story house on Maple Street, just 3 blocks from the elementary school. David Turner worked at the coal mine. Early shifts that meant he left before sunrise. His wife Linda stayed home with their 3 children. Jacob was the middle child, 5 years old, bright-eyed and curious, with a gap-toothed grin and a cowlick that refused to stay flat no matter how much Linda tried to comb it down. He loved dinosaurs, especially the T-Rex. He carried a small plastic one in his jacket pocket everywhere he went. That morning, Linda made breakfast like she always did, scrambled eggs and toast. Jacob ate quickly, excited because his class was going on a field trip to the pumpkin patch that day. He wore his favorite blue jacket, the one with the hood, and his sneakers with the Velcro straps because he hadn't learned to tie laces yet. His older sister, Emily, was 8. She usually walked Jacob to the bus stop, but that morning she had woken up with a stomachache. Linda kept her home, told Jacob she would watch him from the porch while he walked to the corner. The bus stop was right there, less than 100 yards away at the corner of Maple and Oak. Linda could see it clearly from their front steps. Jacob kissed his mother goodbye, grabbed his backpack, the one with the T-Rex patch sewn on the front, and headed out the door. Linda stood on the porch, arms crossed against the morning chill, watching her son walk down the sidewalk. He turned back once, waved, she waved back. Then he rounded the corner toward the bus stop. Linda waited. She could hear other children's voices, the sound of the school bus approaching in the distance. She went inside to check on Emily, grabbed her a glass of water. It took maybe 2 minutes. When she came back to the porch, the bus was pulling away. Linda frowned. That was fast. She walked to the end of the driveway, looked toward the corner. The other children were gone. The bus was driving down the street. Everything seemed normal, but something felt wrong. Linda walked to the corner, her heart beginning to race. "Where's Jacob?" she called out to a neighbor who was getting into her car. The neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, looked confused. "I didn't see him. Wasn't he on the bus?" Linda's stomach dropped. She ran to the bus stop, looked around, called his name. "Jacob, Jacob, where are you?" Nothing. She ran back home, called the school. They said Jacob never got on the bus. Linda's hands shook as she dialed her husband at the mine. Then she called the police. Within 20 minutes, Millfield police arrived. It was a small department, only 4 officers. Chief Tom Brennan took the call himself. "Mrs. Turner, when did you last see Jacob?" "This morning, maybe 10 minutes ago. He was walking to the bus stop right there." Chief Brennan walked to the corner, looked around. There were no signs of a struggle, no torn backpack, no jacket left behind. Just an empty street corner and a mother's worst nightmare beginning to unfold. The chief radioed for backup, called the county sheriff. Within an hour, search teams were forming. Neighbors poured out of their houses, volunteers from the church, parents from the school. Everyone who could walk joined the search. They combed through yards, knocked on doors, checked garages and sheds. Someone suggested the woods behind the school. Teams went in with flashlights and dogs, even though it was still daylight. David Turner arrived from the mine, still in his work clothes, covered in coal dust, his face pale with fear. "Where's my son? Where's Jacob?" No one had answers. By evening, the story was on local news. Jacob Turner, 5 years old, missing since this morning. Last seen walking to his bus stop in Millfield. His school photo flashed on the screen. That gap-toothed smile, that stubborn cowlick. Linda sat on the couch, clutching Jacob's T-Rex toy, the one he usually carried but had left on the kitchen table that morning. She stared at the TV, at her son's face, and whispered the same words over and over. "He was right there. I was watching him. He was right there." Days turned into weeks, the search expanded, state police joined, the FBI was notified. Tips came in, someone thought they saw a boy matching Jacob's description at a rest stop 2 counties over. It wasn't him. Another caller said they saw a suspicious van near the school that morning. Police tracked it down. It belonged to a plumber working on a house 3 streets away. He had an alibi. Every lead went nowhere. By November, 1 month after Jacob disappeared, the town of Millfield was paralyzed with grief and fear. Parents no longer let their children walk alone. The school implemented new pickup procedures. The innocence of the small town shattered. And the Turner family, they were trapped in a nightmare with no end. The first year was unbearable. Linda stopped sleeping. She would lie awake at night listening for the sound of the front door, imagining Jacob walking through it, saying he was lost, but now he was home. But he never came. David threw himself into work, double shifts at the mine, anything to keep his mind occupied, anything to avoid the empty chair at the dinner table. Emily, only 8 years old, blamed herself. If she hadn't been sick that morning, if she had walked to Jacob to the bus stop like she always did, maybe he would still be here. Linda tried to comfort her, told her it wasn't her fault, but Emily carried the guilt anyway. It followed her through childhood, through adolescence, into adulthood. The Millfield police kept the case open. Chief Brennan made it his personal mission. He interviewed every resident within a 5-mile radius, checked every registered sex offender in 3 counties, followed every possible lead. But there was nothing. No physical evidence, no witnesses, no body. Jacob had simply vanished. By 1991, 2 years after the disappearance, the case was officially classified as cold. Chief Brennan retired in 1995. He handed the file to the incoming chief, a younger man named Greg Holloway, and said with tears in his eyes, "Don't let that boy be forgotten." Chief Holloway promised he wouldn't, and he kept that promise. Every year on October 3rd, he would pull Jacob's file, review it, see if there was anything new, any technology that might help. But year after year, there was nothing. Linda became a shadow of herself. She stopped going to church, stopped seeing friends. She spent most of her time in Jacob's room, the room she refused to change. His bed was still made, his toys still lined up on the shelf, his blue jacket still hung on the back of the door. David begged her to talk to someone, to see a therapist, but Linda refused. She said talking wouldn't bring Jacob back. Every October 3rd, the anniversary of his disappearance, Linda would bake Jacob's favorite chocolate chip cookies. She would set a place for him at the table, light a candle, and sit there for hours. David would join her. They would hold hands in silence. Emily would sit with them when she was old enough to understand. The town of Millfield never forgot Jacob either. Every year there was a vigil at the elementary school. Parents and teachers would gather, light candles, say prayers. A memorial bench was placed at the corner of Maple and Oak, the spot where Jacob was last seen. It had a small plaque that read, "In memory of Jacob Turner, forever 5, forever loved." Linda visited that bench every single week. She would sit there, talk to Jacob like he could hear her. "I'm still looking for you, baby. I'll never stop. Wherever you are, I hope you know how much we love you." By the year 2000, 11 years had passed. Emily was 19. She'd graduated high school, started community college, but she never left Millfield. She couldn't. Not while Jacob was still missing. She became involved in missing children's advocacy, volunteered with organizations that helped families like hers. It was her way of coping, her way of doing something when she felt so helpless. David's health began to decline. Years of hard labor in the mines combined with the emotional weight of losing his son took a toll. He developed lung problems, had to retire early. Linda took a job at the grocery store. They needed the income, but more than that, Linda needed something to do. Sitting at home alone with her thoughts was unbearable. In 2005, the case got brief media attention again when a true crime podcast featured Jacob's story. Tips came in from all over the country. People claiming they had seen him. People offering psychic visions. People confessing to crimes they didn't commit. Police investigated every single one, but none of them led anywhere. Chief Holloway, now a veteran of the department, told the Turner family he hadn't given up, but Linda could see the resignation in his eyes. He didn't think Jacob would ever be found. By 2010, 21 years had passed. Linda was 56 years old. Her hair had gone gray, her face lined with decades of grief. David was weaker now, using oxygen at home. The doctors said his lungs were failing. Emily was married, living 2 towns over. She had a daughter of her own, a little girl she named Hope, because even after everything, Emily refused to let go of hope. But hope was a fragile thing. It flickered like a candle in the wind, sometimes bright, sometimes barely there. In 2015, David Turner passed away. His last words to Linda were, "When you find him, tell him I never stopped looking." Linda buried her husband next to an empty grave, a plot they had reserved years ago for Jacob just in case. The headstone was already there. Jacob Michael Turner, October 1983 to October 1989, beloved son and brother, forever in our hearts. But there was no body beneath it, just earth and hope and unbearable sadness. Emily stood at her father's funeral holding her daughter's hand and made a silent vow. She would find out what happened to Jacob no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. She owed it to her father, to her mother, to the little brother she still dreamed about. By 2020, 31 years had passed since Jacob disappeared. Linda was 66, still living in the same house on Maple Street, still keeping Jacob's room exactly as it was. She had accepted that she would probably never see her son again. Not in this life, but she refused to stop hoping for answers. She just wanted to know what happened, where he was, if he had suffered, if he had been afraid. She wanted to bring him home. And then, in the fall of 2024, something changed. A forensic anthropologist named Dr. Sarah Chen was reviewing cold cases for a project with the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. She came across Jacob Turner's file, read through the reports, the interviews, the dead ends, and then she noticed something. A note from 1992, 13 years after Jacob disappeared. A hunter had found skeletal remains in a wooded area about 15 miles from Millfield. The remains were examined, determined to be a child, but DNA testing was still in its infancy back then. The remains were stored, labeled as unidentified, and the case went cold. Dr. Chen requested the remains be retested using modern DNA technology, the kind that didn't exist in 1992. She also requested a DNA sample from Linda Turner. Linda agreed immediately. After 35 years, she was ready for the truth, whatever it was. The results took 6 weeks, and when they came back, everything changed. November 18, 2024, Linda Turner received a phone call that would change everything. It was Dr. Sarah Chen from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. Her voice was gentle but serious. "Mrs. Turner, we have the DNA results. I need you to sit down." Linda was already sitting. She had been sitting by the phone for weeks waiting. "Tell me." Dr. Chen took a breath. "The remains we retested, the ones found in 1992, they're a match to your DNA, Mrs. Turner. We've identified them as Jacob." The world stopped. Linda couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't think. Jacob, her baby, had been gone for 35 years, and now, finally, she knew. He hadn't run away. He hadn't been taken across the country. He had been 15 miles away this entire time. 15 miles. "Mrs. Turner, are you there?" Linda's voice came out as a whisper. Where was he? Dr. Chen explained. The remains were found in a densely wooded area off Route 33, about 15 miles north of Millfield. A hunter discovered them in late 1992, but the technology back then couldn't make a definitive identification. Linda closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. How did he die? Dr. Chen's voice was careful. "Based on the forensic analysis, we believe Jacob died shortly after his disappearance. The location and condition of the remains suggest he may have been taken to that area and left there. We're treating this as a homicide." Homicide, the word hung in the air like a weight. Linda had always known deep down that Jacob hadn't just wandered off, but hearing it confirmed, hearing that someone had taken her son, had hurt him, had left him alone in the woods. It was more than she could bear. Dr. Chen continued, "We're reopening the investigation. We have forensic evidence from the site, and with modern technology, we may be able to find who did this." Linda nodded, even though Dr. Chen couldn't see her. "Find them. Please find them." Within hours, the news spread through Millfield. Jacob Turner had been found. Emily got the call from her mother. She collapsed in her kitchen. Her husband caught her, held her as she sobbed. For 35 years, she had carried the guilt, the what-ifs, the endless questions. Now she had an answer, and it broke her heart all over again. But there was something else, too. A strange sense of relief. Jacob wasn't out there alone anymore. He wasn't lost. He was coming home. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation assembled a task force, detectives, forensic experts, cold case specialists. They re-examined every piece of evidence from 1989, every interview, every tip, every lead that had gone nowhere. And they started looking at the physical evidence from the site where Jacob's remains were found. The area was remote, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that branched off Route 33. It was the kind of place locals used for hunting or dumping trash. Isolated, hidden, the perfect place to hide a crime. In 1992, when the remains were first discovered, investigators had searched the area but found little. A few scraps of fabric, some plastic fragments, nothing conclusive. But now, with advanced forensic techniques, the team went back. They used ground-penetrating radar. They sifted through soil samples. They analyzed every fragment that had been stored in evidence for over 3 decades. And they found something. A small piece of blue nylon fabric, weathered and faded but still intact. It matched the description of Jacob's jacket, the blue one with the hood that he had been wearing the day he disappeared. They also found something else, a cigarette butt, buried in the soil near where the remains had been discovered. It had been there for decades, protected from the elements by layers of dirt and leaves. DNA was extracted from the cigarette. It was degraded but still usable, and it was run through the national database. No match. But that didn't mean the investigation was over. It just meant they had to dig deeper. Detectives began re-interviewing people from 1989, tracking down anyone who had lived in Millfield at the time, anyone who had been questioned, anyone who might have seen something. Most of the original witnesses were elderly now. Some had moved away, some had passed away. But one name kept coming up, a man named Raymond Keller. In 1989, Raymond Keller had been 34 years old. He lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of Millfield, about 2 miles from Maple Street. He worked odd jobs, mostly landscaping and handyman work. He was quiet, kept to himself. People described him as strange but harmless. When Jacob disappeared, Keller had been interviewed by police. He said he had been home that morning, hadn't seen anything, didn't know the Turner family. His alibi was weak, but there was no evidence linking him to the case, so he was cleared. Now, 35 years later, detectives wanted to talk to him again. They tracked him down to a nursing home in Columbus, Ohio. He was 70 years old, suffering from dementia, barely able to hold a conversation. But they requested a DNA sample anyway. Keller's daughter, who had power of attorney, agreed. She said her father had been a difficult man, distant, cold, but she never thought he was capable of violence. Still, she wanted the truth just like everyone else. The DNA sample was processed and compared to the cigarette butt found at the site. It took 2 weeks, and when the results came back, they were a match. Raymond Keller's DNA was on that cigarette, at the site where Jacob Turner's remains were found. Detectives went to the nursing home. They sat with Keller, tried to question him, but his mind was gone. He didn't remember 1989, didn't remember Millfield, didn't remember Jacob. He stared at them with empty eyes and said nothing. Legally, he couldn't be charged. His dementia made him incompetent to stand trial. He would never see a courtroom, never answer for what he had done. But the evidence was clear. Raymond Keller had taken Jacob Turner, and he had left him in those woods to die. The investigators informed Linda. They told her everything. The DNA match, Keller's background, the fact that justice, in the traditional sense, would never be served. Linda listened in silence, and when they finished, she asked only one question. Did Jacob suffer? The lead detective, a woman named Captain Rebecca Marsh, chose her words carefully. Based on the evidence, we believe it happened quickly. He wouldn't have been alone for long. It was a small comfort, but it was something. Linda thanked them. Then she asked when she could bring Jacob home. Soon, Captain Marsh said, very soon. On December 10th, 2024, Jacob Turner's remains were released to his family. A funeral was held at the same church where Linda had prayed for 35 years. The whole town of Millfield came, people who had searched for Jacob in 1989, people who had grown up hearing his story, people who had never forgotten. Emily stood at the front, holding her daughter Hope's hand, and read a letter she had written to her little brother. Jacob, I'm so sorry it took this long. I'm sorry I wasn't there that morning. I'm sorry for everything, but you're home now, and we'll never let you go again. Linda sat in the front row, silent, clutching a small plastic T-Rex, the one Jacob had left on the kitchen table 35 years ago. She didn't cry, she had no tears left. But as they lowered the casket into the ground, next to the father who had never stopped looking, Linda whispered the words she had waited a lifetime to say. Welcome home, baby, welcome home. After the funeral, the investigation continued. Even though Raymond Keller could never stand trial, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation wanted to build a complete picture of what happened on October 3rd, 1989. Captain Rebecca Marsh and her team dug into Keller's background, searching for answers, searching for patterns, searching for anything that might explain why he had taken Jacob Turner. What they found was deeply disturbing. Raymond Keller had been born in 1955 in rural Kentucky. His childhood was marked by instability. His father was an alcoholic who disappeared when Keller was 7. His mother worked multiple jobs and was rarely home. Keller dropped out of high school at 16, drifted through various jobs, mostly manual labor, landscaping, construction, nothing that required much interaction with people. In 1978, at age 23, Keller was arrested for trespassing on an elementary school playground after hours. He claimed he was just walking through, but a teacher had reported seeing him watching children from his car on multiple occasions. He was given a warning. No charges were filed. In 1982, he was questioned in connection with the disappearance of a young girl in Indiana, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge him. The case remains unsolved to this day. In 1985, Keller moved to Millfield, Ohio. He rented a small house on the edge of town, kept to himself, did odd jobs for cash. Neighbors described him as quiet, awkward, someone who made them uncomfortable, but they couldn't quite say why. One neighbor, an elderly woman named Margaret Willis, remembered that Keller used to sit on his porch in the mornings, watching children walk to the bus stop. She had mentioned it to her husband once, said it gave her a bad feeling, but her husband told her she was being paranoid. Now, decades later, Margaret wished she had said something to the police. On the morning of October 3, 1989, investigators believe Keller was driving through the neighborhood, possibly looking for an opportunity. He may have seen Jacob walking alone to the bus stop, saw that Linda had gone back inside, saw that no other adults were around. He stopped his truck, a blue Ford pickup that several witnesses from 1989 had mentioned seeing in the area, but could never definitively connect to anything. Keller likely approached Jacob. Maybe he told him his mother had sent him. Maybe he said Jacob's dog had run away and he needed help finding it. Whatever he said, it was enough to get a trusting 5-year-old boy into his truck. From there, Keller drove north on Route 33 away from town, toward the remote wooded area where hunters and locals sometimes dumped trash. What happened next is unclear. Keller never confessed, never spoke about it, and with his dementia, he never would. But forensic evidence suggested that Jacob died shortly after being taken, possibly from asphyxiation or blunt force trauma. The remains were too degraded to determine an exact cause of death. Keller left Jacob's body in the woods, covered it with leaves and branches, and drove away. He went back to his quiet life in Millfield, continued doing odd jobs, continued being the strange man on the edge of town that no one really knew. In 1992, when the remains were discovered, Keller was questioned again, along with dozens of other people, but without DNA technology advanced enough to make a connection. He was cleared. He lived in Millfield until 2001, then moved to Columbus to be closer to his daughter, the only family member who still had contact with him. He lived there quietly for over 2 decades, and by the time investigators connected him to Jacob's case, his mind was gone. Captain Marsh met with Keller's daughter, a woman named Paula, who was shocked and devastated by the news. She had always known her father was distant, emotionally unavailable, but she never imagined he was capable of murdering a child. Paula cooperated fully with investigators. She handed over boxes of her father's belongings, old notebooks, photographs, anything that might provide more insight. In one of the notebooks, investigators found something chilling, a list of dates and locations, all corresponding to elementary schools in Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. Next to some of the dates were initials. Investigators cross-referenced them with missing children cases from the 1980s and 1990s. 3 of the cases matched. 3 other children, all around the same age as Jacob, all missing under similar circumstances. The investigation expanded. FBI agents joined the task force. They began reviewing those cold cases, requesting DNA testing, comparing evidence. It would take years to build a complete picture, but it was becoming clear that Jacob Turner may not have been Raymond Keller's only victim. Linda was informed of the developments. Captain Marsh sat with her in her living room, explained that Jacob's case had opened the door to solving other cases, that other families might finally get answers. Linda listened quietly, then said something that stayed with Captain Marsh for a long time. If finding Jacob helps even one other family, then maybe his death wasn't completely meaningless. It was a heartbreaking statement, but it also reflected the strength Linda had carried for 35 years. The strength to keep hoping, to keep searching, to keep loving a son she couldn't hold. Emily threw herself into advocacy work. She partnered with organizations that pushed for better DNA databases, for more funding for cold case investigations, for laws that protected children. She spoke at conferences, shared Jacob's story, urged parents to stay vigilant, urged lawmakers to take action. Jacob's case became a catalyst. It reminded people that cold cases are never truly closed, that families never stop grieving, and that advances in science can bring justice even decades later. In early 2025, the Ohio State Legislature introduced a bill called Jacob's Law, which allocated additional funding for cold case DNA testing and required all unidentified remains to be retested every 10 years using the latest technology. Linda was invited to the State House when the bill was signed into law. She stood beside the governor, tears in her eyes, holding a framed photo of Jacob. "This is for every family still searching," she said quietly, "for every child still missing, for every parent still hoping." The bill passed unanimously. Jacob Turner's name would be remembered not just as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience, of the power of truth, and of a mother's unbreakable love. It has been over a year since Jacob Turner was finally laid to rest. Over a year since Linda got the answers she had prayed for, the answers she had waited 35 years to receive. The pain hasn't disappeared. Grief like that never fully goes away, but there is something different now, something that wasn't there before. Closure. Linda still lives in the same house on Maple Street. She still keeps Jacob's room the way it was, but now it feels less like a shrine and more like a memory, a place where she can sit and remember the happy moments, the 5 short years she had with her son. She visits the cemetery often, the plot where Jacob now rests beside his father. She brings flowers. She talks to them both. She tells them about Emily's daughter Hope, about how she's growing up strong and kind, about how the family is healing, slowly but surely. Emily has become a leading voice in cold case advocacy. She travels across the country speaking at events, working with law enforcement, pushing for legislative change. Jacob's Law has inspired similar bills in other states. Families who thought their cases would never be solved are finding new hope, new resources, new possibilities. Emily often thinks about that morning in 1989, about the stomachache that kept her home, about the guilt she carried for so many years. She knows now that it wasn't her fault, that evil doesn't need a reason, that sometimes terrible things happen and no one can stop them. But she also knows that Jacob's story didn't end in those woods. It continued through the people who loved him, through the investigators who never gave up, through the science that finally brought him home. Raymond Keller died in March 2025. He passed away in the nursing home. His dementia so advanced that he likely had no idea who he was or what he had done. There was no funeral, no obituary. His daughter Paula chose to cremate him quietly. She wanted no public acknowledgement of a man who had caused so much pain. Paula has spent the last year in therapy, trying to reconcile the father she thought she knew with the monster he truly was. She reached out to Linda once through Captain Marsh to offer an apology, to say she was sorry for what her father had done. Linda accepted the apology. She told Paula that none of this was her fault, that she hoped Paula could find peace too. It was an act of grace that not many people could have offered. But Linda had spent 35 years learning to live with pain, and she knew that hatred only breeds more suffering. The investigation into Keller's other possible victims is ongoing. 2 of the 3 cases have been solved through DNA. 2 more families have gotten the answers they desperately needed. The 3rd case is still being processed, but investigators are hopeful. Captain Marsh retired in late 2025. She said solving Jacob's case was the most meaningful work of her career. She keeps a photo of Jacob on her desk at home, a reminder of why the work matters, why cold cases can never be forgotten. The town of Millfield has changed too. The memorial bench at the corner of Maple and Oak is still there, but now it has a new plaque, one that reads, Jacob Turner, 1983 to 1989, found and brought home. May his memory inspire justice for all. Every October 3rd, the town still holds a vigil, but now it's not just about grief, it's about hope, it's about resilience. It's about remembering that even in the darkest cases, the truth can still emerge. Linda attended the vigil in 2025. She stood in front of the crowd, held a candle, and spoke for the first time in years. She thanked the investigators, the community, everyone who had never forgotten Jacob. And then she said something that brought tears to everyone's eyes. For 35 years, I lived in the worst kind of pain, the pain of not knowing, but now I know. And even though the truth is heartbreaking, it's also a gift, because I can finally let my son rest. I can finally tell him it's okay, that he's safe now, that he's home. The crowd was silent. The only sound was the crackling of candles in the cool October air. Linda looked up at the sky, at the stars beginning to appear, and she smiled. DNA doesn't forget. Even when decades pass, even when hope seems lost, even when the world moves on, DNA remembers. And because of that, families like the Turners can find peace, can find justice, can find their way home. Jacob's story is a reminder that no case is ever truly cold, that science and determination can uncover the truth, and that a mother's love never dies. If this story moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button. It helps us continue bringing stories like Jacob's to light, stories that need to be told, stories that deserve to be remembered. Leave a comment below, share your thoughts, tell us how cases like this impact you. We read every single one and we're grateful for this community. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the DNA Archives. We're committed to bringing you more cold cases, more mysteries solved through DNA, more stories of justice, truth, and the families who never give up. Thank you for watching, thank you for caring, and remember, the truth is always worth searching for, no matter how long it takes. We'll see you in the next case.